So having done several startups, the sequencing of things is really important because what starts to happen is, let's say you're a new brand and you're doing $20 million in the US. That feels good, but I would say that's still way too early to really do international. You see brands like, I don't know, the Honest brand and some others that are closing in on $1 billion and they're not really international.
This is the E-commerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Kiri Masters and I'm flying solo this week while my trusty sidekick Julie Spear is out on vacation. This week on the show, I'm interviewing one of my favorite podcast hosts, Scot Wingo from the Jason and Scot Show, and I was so thrilled and excited to talk with Scot after listening to him on the Jason and Scot Show for a couple of years now. Scot is a serial entrepreneur who started and exited 3 companies. He started 4 and exited 3. 1, Stingray Software. Number 2, AuctionRover.com. Number 3, Channel Advisor, which is a public company. And Spiffy, his latest business, which is an on-demand car wash and detailing business. And Scot still stays really current and relevant in the retail industry as the chairman of Channel Advisor. So on this podcast, we've got a pretty wide-ranging conversation about Scot's experience in the category. He has a lot of strategic insight into Amazon and what brands are doing just due to the nature of what he does with Channel Advisor. And he's also just a great guy to spitball about, future of technology and e-commerce, the intersection of those two things. So I was really thrilled to have him on the show, and I am definitely going to hunt Jason Goldberg down as well, who's the co-host of their podcast. Before we run the interview, I want to invite you once again to leave a rating and review of this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you listen to the program. Leaving a rating and review helps other people to find the show and know what it's about. And if you do that and you take a screenshot and send it to me, I'll send you, in turn, a copy of the book that I just updated for 2018, the Amazon Expansion Plan. This is a book that I originally wrote in 2016. Within a month, it was needed an update. And I did get to updating it this year for 2018 back in June. So you'll get a paperback copy of that book if you send me a screenshot of your review. Please send it to info@bobsledmarketing.com and I'll get that out to you. So let's run the interview with Scot Wingo from Channel Advisor and Spiffy. So I'm really delighted to have Scot Wingo on the show today. Scot is the founder and executive chairman of Channel Advisor. And prior to Channel Advisor, actually, and after Channel Advisor, Scot, you're who I would call a serial entrepreneur. You've started 4 startups and exited 3 so far, the most recent one being Get Spiffy, an on-demand car wash and detailing business. So I'm really glad to have you on the show today because of your e-commerce and retail background, and also you're the co-host of my favorite ever retail podcast, the Jason and Scot Show. So thanks for coming on the E-commerce Braintrust.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Yeah, you're going to inflate my ego with all that. So I appreciate all the kudos. Yeah, I'm out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and software guy that has started 3 or 4 companies.
Great. Well, let's jump right in. There's a lot that I wanted to talk with you about and a lot of things that have come up on your show that I'm curious to dive into. So one thing that, particularly given your Channel Advisor experience and how over time you must have just seen the retail landscape change so much with traditional retail and then the emergence of marketplaces, initially eBay, and then now Amazon is just such a huge picture piece of that picture. Where do you see traditional retailers, let's say, Macy's, Nordstrom, etc., fitting into a world where brands are increasingly choosing to go direct to consumer?
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of, we're probably on kind of step 2 of 10, and it's interesting to try to predict what the next 8 steps look like. And, so we have this trend you've surfaced, which is brands are going direct to consumers. A lot of new brands are kind of born that way, like the Bonobos and the digitally native vertical brands. So it's kind of interesting to think through what happens to retailers. So, one trend inside of there is more and more private label, or what's increasingly called owned brands. So every retailer has now got a pretty big strategy around either, some kind of exclusive content. So they'll either become exclusive with the brands, or they will actually just go kind of buy or create their own brands. So that's one. So I think, what if most of these stores that sell other people's stuff will have a very large, probably over 50% portion of products that is owned by them in some fashion or exclusive. And then the other really interesting use case is Best Buy. And it kind of takes a page from the online world, where we've seen marketplaces like 53% of Amazon's unit volume, and I think 65% of their transaction volume is a marketplace. And then you have pure marketplaces like eBay. I think, what if a physical store becomes a marketplace? And this is actually pretty popular in China, and Best Buy is a really good kind of use case of that. When you go into Best Buy now, and Best Buy is kind of famously surviving the retail Armageddon right now. And, what they're doing is they're essentially going to their top brand partners, which tend to be Samsung, Apple, Microsoft, et cetera. And they're effectively kind of subleasing out space in the store. Another analyst I know, he kind of calls it, some people would call, a lot of it kind of depends on what country you're from. Some people would call it a bazaar, like a Bazaar. I found in the US that's a weird word, and people are like, what? They think it's Bizarre. Yeah. And then I've heard it called a concession model, kind of like concession booths kind of a thing. I kind of just think of it as a physical marketplace where... Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. There used to be the definition of marketplace has changed a lot recently. That was probably the original definition.
Yeah, so there, the brand and the retailer are sharing more of the risk. So you're kind of saying, hey, open up a Samsung store within a store and staff it with your people. So that reduces the Best Buy staffing risk. And, we're going to, instead of just kind of taking your products and marking them up effectively 100%, maybe we'll take 30% of the sales and you pay us rent. So it's more of less of a performance model and more of kind of a hybrid model, which again is very similar to kind of the online thing. So those are two models that are increasing. When the thing that doesn't jive for me is if every brand goes direct, you still need these aggregation points, because no one wants to go grocery shopping by going to their favorite broccoli farm website, their celery farm website, their cheese website, and then ketchup and all that. So there is still a value for the aggregator, be it a retailer or a marketplace. And that's what's going to be really interesting to see, is what do those happen to look like in the real world, and do they follow the online world, or do they look more kind of like what we're seeing in China? So I think those are the directions we'll go.
That's interesting, actually, because when supermarkets first came into being, they were a category killer for bakeries, butchers, and grocers. And it's almost the same way that we're, looking at marketplaces like Amazon, that it's mass market. There's no curation. And so there's still a lot of niche direct brands that have carved out a place for themselves, and retailers as well that have carved out a place because they're so un-Amazon. And that, you have to be un-Amazon to really differentiate.
Absolutely. Yeah. No one has won going head to head with Amazon. You have to find a little seam or a niche or something and grow that to be not a niche, to be big enough to be a super niche, or whatever not a niche is.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And another question I had for you: all of your ventures so far have been in the service side of things within software. If you were leading an emerging consumer product company right now instead of software, what angle would you be looking to exploit?
Assuming like a consumer product goods kind of a company?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting trends. One that I've spent a lot of time studying is, you're a listener to the show, so we call it the bifurcation. Deloitte has a lot of really good data on this, and it's The US consumer has split up into value oriented and convenience oriented. So those are interesting kind of threads to pull on. And then as you pull on those, you start to see interesting things. And I know some people hate these kind of demographic generalizations, and there is a trap in there where you have to be careful, but like how millennials shop and what's important to them and that kind of thing. There's some really interesting areas where, if you can go and find a category where they haven't had kind of an environmentally friendly revolution or a non-toxic kind of revolution, that would be interesting. So we're seeing that wave in the beauty/makeup category, where all the old makeup is getting thrown out because they realize, gosh, I'm putting all this toxic stuff on my skin. What was I thinking? Yeah. And now there's this whole new wave of brands being born. Some of the old guys will make it through that, but that creates this huge opportunity. I think, when you think about how people are associating with brands, that's interesting. The other one is, today's consumer is very generous, and they really kind of like to have not only an affiliation with the brand because they like it personally, but if it's doing good. So Tom's is kind of the classic example. We're seeing Lisa in that new mattress category compete pretty effectively with Casper and some of the other folks with the every 10 beds they sell, they give away a bed to someone that needs one. So that's, I think there's a lot of areas of the world where you could kind of like have a giving element, an environmentally friendly element, something like that that's a little bit different. There's a lot of stones that have not been overturned in that area.
Right. Oh, interesting. And so even within those segments where we're talking about environmentally friendly or giving back, a lot of those brands are on Amazon now, potentially resisting at first, but ultimately moving on to that channel. So would you be looking at Amazon as a friend or as a foe if you were going to cast your bet one way or another?
Yeah, and I have teenage kids, and there's actually a middle ground there called frenemy. And that's kind of where I put them, is this kind of new word, frenemy. Yeah. So you can't afford not to be on Amazon. It is where I net out on this. And again, this is really theology. So everyone has a different view on this. And I just think we could rattle off the stats. Amazon's over 50% of e-commerce. They're growing 2 to 3 times the rate of e-commerce. If you're not on Amazon, you're effectively not making your product seen by, a really big chunk of the internet. So you kind of have to be there. I like this frenemy approach where, I think some of the best either retailers or brands that approach Amazon, what they do is so first of all, don't be the 8th person to sell, a Nikon digital camera on there. That's not going to be sustainable. But if you do come up with a brand, sell it on there, but use that as a way to get people familiar with you, and then have a website and your own brand experience that offers differentiated experience in some way, a deeper connection with your brand than you can ever get on Amazon. There's a ton of ideas there. So, for example, a couple case studies. Under Armour does some really cool stuff where, their first products are introduced on their website or exclusive there. Yeah. They do a lot of movie tie-ins. For example, like a Batman movie or something, and that product is only available on their website. The shoe companies are really good at this, right? Where they have this whole value chain of where shoes kind of go through and that kind of thing. Customization, I think, is a really cool area. And Amazon probably will never get the platform to the point where customization can be done there. So having your non-customizable products on Amazon, and even to kind of like use makeup, a really cool thing in makeup now is having kind of personal formulas built for you. So imagine, someone falls in love with a brand or gets introduced to it on Amazon, and then they're like, wow, I just wish it was a shade lighter, or, maybe one of the things in there bothers my skin in some way. And then you could have a custom kind of an element on your website. That's kind of the frenemy strategy, is this kind of dual prong of, I'm going to put my product on Amazon and I'm going to, really understand that channel, but it's really a means to an end of getting people into my brand, and then for a net to catch them and pull them into my brand on the website.
Right. Yeah, that's a really great point. There's a great middle ground where you can have a different assortment available. And the other thing that going back to the frenemy comment, I think it's a really good one. When brands tell me we've chosen not to engage with Amazon, we're not going to go there, don't believe in it, or for whatever reason, I always think, do you really know if you're not on Amazon? Because just due to the way that the marketplace is set up, anyone with legally obtained inventory that is, genuine and able to be sold can sell your products on Amazon. And so just because you're not selling directly there yourself as a brand doesn't mean that someone who's picked up your products at the clearance aisle isn't selling your products and potentially just uploading a picture from an iPhone, maybe not describing your product accurately, not creating that brand experience that you want to be known for. So people think that they're not on Amazon, and they are. And that's the worst situation to be in, because then it's just completely uncontrolled.
Absolutely. Kind of the classic example that I've seen is I mentioned Under Armour, and they're a channel advisor customer. And very early on, they realized they needed to embrace Amazon. So they have this kind of total frenemy, deep relationship with Amazon. And then, then you have Adidas, where they have historically, even with Nike now on Amazon, Adidas, to my knowledge, is still very resistant to be there. But I just did a search, and there's 30,000 Adidas products on Amazon. So there's this whole vibrant marketplace going on that they don't have any control or influence, or they're not getting any of the data. So I definitely kind of think be a participant and help steer the ship the right way, or it's just going to sail along without you.
Yeah, definitely. So shifting gears a little bit to talk about private labels, that was one thing that you mentioned is an ace up the sleeve of retailers to generate their own private label brands or expand on those. And there's some really successful examples of retail private label brands. But some of the most successful private label brands are Amazon's these days. And I think the top selling product of all time on Amazon is their own brand of batteries, I believe. Mm-hmm. Frenemy issue number 2 is brands know that when they start selling on Amazon, Amazon's going to get the data around their purchase history and who's buying their products and in what quantities and how the trends are looking. And they're going to use that data to develop their own private label brands. So, and we've seen, is it L2 that's put this at 72 private label brands most recently, I think?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Yeah, they're definitely investing heavily on the private label thing.
Yeah. So how far do you think they're going to go with this? And what's your response to a brand who is cautious about getting involved with Amazon because they're going to be sharing all this data with a potential competitor?
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 things in there. So I think, their logic goes, I'm not going to sell on Amazon because they don't want the data. But you and I just kind of, we both agree that your products are being sold there anyway. So Amazon's still getting the data. So you might as well be a beneficiary from this whole thing and, have some control, and you get the data. So I think, so I kind of like, that's kind of the logic tree I go through there is, saying I'm not going to be on Amazon, and then you're essentially giving them exclusive access to your data in a weird way. So that's a bad decision. You don't want to do that. So now, at least when you're selling on Amazon, you're both seeing the data. And I think there's this interesting, so Amazon, culturally, they do this whole root cause analysis exercise called the 5 whys. And one of the things I think people miss is, why does Amazon do private label? And everyone assumes to cut out the brand. I actually don't think that's why. Amazon is so obsessed with the customer experience. In my experience, when they do a private label, it's because they are frustrated a brand is not addressing a certain customer experience.
Interesting. Huh.
So batteries is a really good example. So again, I have no inside knowledge on this, but my best guess is Amazon has a really big effort around frustration-free packaging.
Yep.
When you buy batteries at the grocery store, it's the most hard, thing to open. It like takes a chisel and a jackknife to get into the thing. So I can imagine this conversation going, hey, I'm this 25-year-old, MBA at Amazon, and I'm now in the battery category, and I'm calling a VP level person at Duracell and Energizer and saying, yeah, we'd really like you to change your packaging. Could you put it in, something, not that clamshell thing? Yeah. And they're like, we've been selling batteries for 500 years. No. So then Amazon finally, I think, and then also the quantities. So the thing I love about, I buy almost all my batteries now on Amazon Basics. And what I love is the packaging. So they come in this really easy to open cardboard thing. So I don't have to tear my teeth out. And then, the AAAs are sold in larger quantities because I burn through those things, and, and the AAs. And, I just think their data told them that. And that's what you have to do as a brand, is say, we should be able to beat Amazon, who is trying to be good at 1,000 things. You should be able to have better batteries than Amazon. And the fact they haven't means they've kind of lost track of the customer and innovation. And that to me is also the flip side of that, is the secret of how you stay in front of this. And you also get into this existential, if you can't do that, then why do you as a brand exist? If
Right.
Amazon can come up with a better product than you can that easily just from some data, then what have you been doing all along to, there's some problem there. I would argue your brand is kind of broken and you need to reevaluate that.
It's such a great point. What's the point of you existing if you're not addressing customers' needs?
Yeah, and I think these traditional brands, so much of what they've done is really financial engineering over the last 20 or 30 years. It's, like the 80th flavor of the thing, or now they're putting out the seasonal scents and that kind of stuff. And because they don't have a direct connection to the consumer, they've really lost track of what's going on with the consumer. And their idea of getting consumer feedback is running these $500,000, research kind of things to go and say, here's 80 scents and flavors, try one and let us know which one you like. And the data, the purchase data, the browsing data, all that is so valuable. And then even the, obviously the ratings and reviews that Amazon gets. Today, every brand needs to be thinking about a direct strategy, really less about cutting out retailers and more just getting some of that back directly to you, or partnering with your retailers to get it back, because that's the lifeblood of this whole thing.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I have heard from consultants that work with brands to get them into brick and mortar stores is that they'll be sitting across the desk from a buyer at Target or wherever, and the Target buyer is pulling up the brand's products on Amazon to check their star rating, and that they've actually, been able to get traction on Amazon. So they're taking that as a leading indicator of whether a brand is going to be successful in store.
Interesting. Yeah.
I like that answer a lot, and it does actually explain to some degree why Amazon's pushed so much into fashion as well, because fashion companies have resisted Amazon because it's so different to their usual model, and they're going to have to kind of put their back into it and figure out how to do returns and how to manage so many SKUs directly rather than going through retail partners. And to your point, Amazon probably got really frustrated with how little effort fashion brands were putting into the platform, and so they launched 20 of their own to fill the gap.
Yeah, kind of a classic example of that is men's khakis. So I'm a very boring shopper, and if I find something I like, I just like to buy as many of them as I can. And so I buy like Izod khakis as my kind of staple casual kind of work clothes. And it's interesting. So, those kind of folks have resisted being on Amazon. Now most of them are. But, if you buy these kinds of things, there's always, so let's say kind of the men's Izods pants you would see in Macy's are going to be $70, $60 to $70. But you can go to an Izod outlet and get a kind of a little bit of a lower quality one for $50. And then, maybe you could find an off brand for maybe half of that. Mm-hmm. Until Amazon got really frustrated, they didn't have all those price points. They kind of had that $50 to $70 price point, but they didn't have the lower ones. So that seems to be the strategy when you kind of look now. So the big brands won't put their outlet type stuff on there because it's exclusive in the outlet, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's their strategy. So then Amazon has filled it out. That's where Amazon's private label sits. It's usually kind of about half price there. And then what's interesting is Amazon has then kind of layered in direct from China sellers in the apparel category is full of this. I'm sure you've seen it. And so that'll be kind of like your $15. So you have a pair of khakis for $15, $30, and $60 now, which kind of addresses the needs of all the different consumers. The value-oriented person will probably trade off between the Amazon brand and the Chinese brand. Someone like me will kind of stay, looking at that, what's the little alligator worth? And then, wow, these Amazon ones are half price and they seem to be just as good. So it's really interesting. That's kind of what I've seen in fashion, is kind of going deeper into that value chain whenever possible.
Yeah, that brings up the selection concept, that because of the marketplace model, Amazon basically has infinite selection, and they're able to, bring on board thousands of Chinese manufacturers who operate at a certain price point and then mid-range, and the Amazon's making a big push into luxury brands across all categories now. And the issue that I think I've certainly had myself and other consumers as well is that when I went to go search for a wireless keyboard, it was 3 pages deep until I saw any brand that I recognized. I didn't want to buy an off-brand keyboard and it not work or have to return it or whatever. I really wanted to have a brand that I recognized and trusted to just make that purchase quite quickly. I'm just talking about a $30 purchase, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the whole role that brands should play, is a marker of not always quality, but trust or whatever kind of attribute they're going for. It's meant to be a way for consumers to make decisions in a crowded market or one where there's not a whole lot of information. And I think Amazon suffers from a lack of information problem. But do you think that there's, because of this infinite selection and the fact that there are just so many options and so many kind of white label brands out there now, that it could have the opposite effect in that people are going to kind of, there's going to be a reverse trend back to brands, if you will?
Yeah, so I think you're assuming Amazon stays stationary in that world, and I think what Amazon will do is they'll continue to innovate and surface to you this kind of right mix of, here's traditional products that satisfy your needs, but you may want to take a look at this kind of up and coming new thing. And in many ways, their ad platform is doing this, where, when I talk to folks that are launching new stuff, they're finding the Amazon, that's a really good sweet spot for the Amazon ad platform. Within that platform, there's a variety of ways of doing things. We've even talked to customers at Channel Advisor. These are larger, multi-billion-dollar type brand houses. When they launch a brand on Amazon using the ad system there, they can actually feel the effects downstream. So it creates pull in offline retailers. So they'll launch a product, nationally, both online and offline. They'll do Amazon ads. They're claiming they can see measurable, I don't know how they're doing this, but they can see measurable lift at even like Target, Walmart, et cetera, or, or a Kohl's or something because of that Amazon, awareness. And this goes to the stats that are out there. Something like 50 to 65% of people start their buying experience at Amazon. So they kind of counter to what you're saying. They are using Amazon to go research products and understand them. And a fair number of people take that information and then go buy offline. So I think Amazon will innovate through it. Things like the ad network, just because Amazon has something like 400 million SKUs, and yet it's getting hard to find stuff there. You're starting to see some badging like Amazon Choice, and I think they'll continue to layer on really good discoverability on top of that helps people navigate that sea of products.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually saw, it must have been a beta test on Amazon the other day where I searched for a brand, and instead of a banner ad or headline search ad that usually comes up, there was an Amazon placement that said, for this brand, it's like a skincare brand, most popular, most frequently bought, and best price. And it was a widget that was pulling out from the brand selection products with those attributes. So yeah, there's so many different ways they can do that. And that was very clearly a test, because I searched again and it didn't show up. But
that's interesting.
Have that data.
I've seen that in apparel a fair number. Like if you look for, I was looking for a men's button-down shirt, and I saw something similar to there.
Right.
Of course, it's easy to have a conspiracy theory because a lot of the brands it was recommending were Amazon's, their own button-down shirt brand.
Right.
So it is a little scary sometimes when you add all these things up.
Yeah. Okay. The final area I wanted to dive into, while we've still got a little time, is about global expansion. And this is something that Amazon's really pushing to merchants and brands, and they've really knuckled down with their fulfillment center offerings and trying to make it as simple as possible for brands to expand internationally. But it's a lot easier said than done when you're talking about different tax regimes and importing and other types of compliance initiatives that you need to handle. So I just wanted to get your read on the opportunity there. And is it something that brands should really be considering relative to the actual opportunity of international markets?
Yeah. And so I'm assuming we're talking about kind of US-based brands.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're talking about Canada, Australia, the UK, they're the obvious ones that folks think of, English-speaking markets. So, but the populations are a lot smaller. So I think people their eyes are too big for their stomach in some cases.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it. So having done several startups, the sequencing of things is really important because what starts to happen is, let's say you're a new brand and you're doing $20 million in the US. That feels good, but I would say that's still way too early to really do international. You need to be kind of you see brands like, I don't know, the Honest brand and some others that are closing in on $1 billion and they're not really international. That's a whole family of brands. So it's kind of like hard to say, but there's kind of this, I guess if you were over 100 million and you felt like you were in all the outlets you wanted to be in, online and offline, and all that was really well baked, then international could be kind of the next leg of growth. So there's definitely a lot of people that get like really excited about it too early, and you don't have the scale to support all the complexities you talked about. Now, I also think there's this kind of interesting kind of, it feels like a huge step function, right? So I'm going to be US only, and now I'm going to go international. And what is nice is, and I would kind of lump eBay, Amazon, and Alibaba all in here, these marketplaces. And then even if you want to go into the like South America, Mercado Libre, the marketplaces give you what I would call kind of a smoothing effect. So instead of a stair step, they can kind of have a little more of an on-ramp. So what all these marketplaces offer are a variety of programs that let you do things like, okay, phase one is what I would call a reshipping program. So Mr. Marketplace, and when I say that, I mean like those kind of big guys. I'm going to sell my brand in whatever countries you recommend. And then you do the reshipping for me and everything else, and then just write me a check. So it's almost kind of like having a distributor or something take care of it for you.
Right.
So all the marketplaces have that. On eBay, it's called global shipping. Amazon has kind of like a global FBA thing. And then Alibaba and Mercado Libre all have these kind of offerings. And then what you do is you just ship it to a US address. A lot of times it's in Miami or LA, depending on which country it's going to. And then they reship it to the consumer. And what's good about that is it gets you, I'm big on this data thing. You start getting some data back. And now you can say, wow, I would have never guessed, my wool socks would be so popular in Germany, or, I don't know what it is. And then you start to kind of get this feel for a roadmap for what to do next. And, things that, we had this kind of classic example at ChannelAdvisor where we had a guy that was into water skis and snowboards. And his challenge was just the seasonality in the US. And just using the global shipping program, his number one country, and I say this because it's probably near and dear to your heart, came out to be Australia. He was thinking it would be more like the UK. And it was because they're in the Southern Hemisphere, it gave him this really cool counter-cyclical thing.
Yes.
So when he's water skis here, he's snow skis there. And it really kind of helped his business. It helped him kind of deal with the lumpiness of that on both sides of the equation. Yeah. So then, that's step one is use the marketplaces. I kind of call it an agile framework for cross-border trade. Use it to kind of, get your products in a bunch of countries, kind of the usual suspects. Then if you do find a hot spot like in Australia or something, then you can look and say, all right, now it's time to go set up an entity there, get a bank account, figure out, how do I create a .com.au? How do I do this, that, and the other? And maybe even putting employees in country and that kind of thing. Because now you have you have some revenue to go along with that. So that's what takes out that step function is A, you get some data back, and then B, you can start to kind of ease into those things while you have revenue. The old school way was I'm going to invest $1 million and just pray that revenue shows up.
Right.
When I go, hire people, open an entity, get a warehouse, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And that's a huge risk to anybody. So the more you can mitigate that risk and get some data and some sales, that is a much smarter approach, I think.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that from Amazon's standpoint, their priority is getting as much selection in these new markets as possible because selection drives sales. And so they're really, really pushing it. And I think that a lot of people have the perception that it's easier than it really is. To your point. Yeah. Cool.
By kind of putting your whole catalog in one of these cross-border platforms, it also kind of gives you this data of which of your SKUs will be popular in those areas. And the thing I've learned is you can spend all this time and effort, trying to guess what it's going to be, and you'll always be wrong. So you might as well just start and see kind of invert that decision flow and let people tell you versus trying to guess, because it's impossible to guess consumer preferences.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to leave the Amazon/e-commerce portion of the interview and learn a little bit more about what you're up to these days with Get Spiffy and all the other stuff that you have going on.
Yeah. So I'm still on the board of Channel Advisor and kind of try to keep my e-commerce chops going there. But I do spend the bulk of my time on Spiffy. And what we do is, the way a lot of people say, okay, you did all this e-commerce stuff and now you're helping people wash cars. Why? There's no connective tissue there. But here's kind of how it all connects for me. I think with e-commerce, we've seen products go digital over the last 20 years. And if we go back in time 20 years ago and give you a phone, A, you'd be blown away by the phone, but B, say press this button and a product would show up 2 days later, your mind would be blown, right?
Mm.
So, but now it's just an everyday thing for us. And I think services go digital. And you probably know this being a financial kind of person, but there's more services sold than there are products. And, what I mean by services going digital is kind of like that Uber level of an experience. So there's a digital phone kind of an experience, usually an app. It may be a website. People don't really care at the end of the day, just a responsive, it feels like an app at least. And you, the consumer, now have all the power versus the service provider or the seller of the product having the power. So imagine, we all have things done to our apartment or house. I want all that stuff to be done that way because I want to pay with a credit card. I don't have cash. I don't want to have you call me 800 times. I want to be able to schedule it on my terms, not yours. I want to be able to see where you are, the status of the project and all that. So I just find that a really interesting area that we can take all that we've learned in e-commerce and really accelerate that. E-commerce has taken 20, 25 years to get to this point. I think we can get the services industry there a lot faster. So car washing ended up being something I was already kind of involved with, and a good, kind of like Amazon did with books. It's not this logical, this hugely kind of, buying a couch online even today is a little kind of squishy or something like that. So buying a car wash online isn't that huge of a leap, we found. So we're using that as kind of an anchor point to then be able to do more, like, can we change your oil? Can we just take care of your entire car for you and not have you even worry about it, kind of thing. And, so far we're going after that convenience oriented consumer I talked about. And they really love this, and they're clearly willing to pay, more than the go to a car wash kind of an experience.
Right.
And, so we've been real fortunate with that. And it's been a lot of fun to dig in and understand it.
That's great. Yeah. Now I see the link now that you've explained it. I didn't before, but that does make a lot of sense. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. It was really great to chat. And where can people follow your e-commerce adventures? Yeah,
probably the best place is Twitter. So I'm Scot Wingo, and the only trick is it's Scot with one T. So it's SCOT, and then Wingo is just like bingo with a W, WINGO. So I'm on Twitter as Scot Wingo. Then the same thing over on LinkedIn. Those are probably two good places to find me. And then the podcast I do with Jason is if you just go to iTunes and search for Jason and Scot, you will find us there. It's a great show. Highly recommended. Thanks again for coming on the show, Scot, and hopefully talk to you again soon. Thanks, Carrie. Really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.